The last Tradia science fiction, HFY story. The Grand Galactic Commerce Hall had never seen such silence. 300 different species, each representing civilizations that had conquered the stars, stared fixedly at the central holographic screen. The hall itself was an architectural marvel. Quantum crystal walls displaying real-time views of 1,000 different star systems, ceilings simulating the void of deep space, and levitation platforms accommodating the diverse physiological needs of the species present. Some breathed methane, others required triple gravity, and there were those who existed partially in other dimensions. But all, absolutely all, were present that day for the same reason: the largest planetary property auction in 50 standard years. Lot number 7841, announced the auction master, a crystalline being from the quartz hegemony named Zelthian. His voice resonated through universal translators in 300 languages simultaneously. A Class M planet death category: toxic surface, poisonous atmosphere, extreme radiation. Previously inhabited by the species humans. A murmur ran through the hall. The humans. That name brought uncomfortable memories for many species present. Not because they had been enemies, but because they had been forgotten. An entire civilization erased from the galactic map in less than 2 years. Historical records describe them as a promising species, curious, creatively chaotic, but also as a warning of what happens when a civilization expands too quickly without understanding the limits of its own planet. Earth, Zelthian continued, projecting holographic images of the planet. The images showed a gray and dead world, wrapped in toxic amber-colored clouds. The oceans were a sickly green, the landmasses looked like burn scars. Was declared uninhabitable exactly 500 standard years ago after the great ecological collapse. The human species, approximately 7 billion individuals, became extinct. The planet now contains valuable mineral resources beneath its toxic crust, significant deposits of rare elements usable for warp-class ship construction. A Vrail merchant, a four-armed creature with blue scaly skin, floated in his levitation capsule near the front. Starting price: 100 million galactic credits. It was an absolute bargain. An entire planet, even a dead one, was worth at least 10 times more on the open market. The mineral resources alone would justify an investment of 500 million. But no one was raising their hand. No one was making bids because there were stories. Stories of prospecting ships that approached Earth and whose systems inexplicably failed. Stories of exploration teams that reported anomalies in sensors. Stories of voices on abandoned radio frequencies, whispers in dead languages. They were just rumors, space superstitions. But in a galaxy where civilizations millions of years old existed, one learned to respect superstitions. "Any offers?" asked Zelthian, his crystal voice resonating with a touch of impatience. Pause. Silence. The oldest species exchanged glances. The Thal, known for their ancestral wisdom, simply shook their elongated heads. In the back row of the hall, completely covered by a dark tunic woven with fiber that blocked all biometric scanners, was a being that no one had noticed entering. Their identification registered simply, independent trader, unknown sector. Not even the hall's most advanced security systems had been able to obtain more information. It was as if this trader existed in a data void. The figure had been observing the entire process with infinite patience, had watched as complete stellar systems were auctioned, ancient space stations, mining rights and black holes, had waited completely motionless for 8 hours. "Waiting for this exact moment, 500 million, said a calm but firm voice from that tunic. The voice was clearly feminine, with an accent that none of the universal translators could fully identify. The hall fell into absolute silence. 300 different species, some of which communicated through pheromones or brain waves, all simultaneously stopped making any noise. Even the ambient hum of life support systems seemed to diminish. "Pardon?" The auction master blinked confused, his crystalline facets refracting light in 1,000 directions. "Did you say 500 million? 500 million galactic credits," the voice repeated with absolute calm. "For Earth, immediate cash. Verifiable transfer in 30 seconds. The Vrail merchant who had asked the initial price turned in his capsule, his 4 eyes focusing on the hooded figure. "Who are you to—" "Someone with money," the voice interrupted, and now there was a touch of steel in it. and someone who understands the real value of what you're selling. Any counteroffers? The Vral opened his mouth to respond, but one of the elderly Thal placed a hand on his shoulder, slowly shaking his head. There was something in that voice, something in the way the figure stood motionless. That provoked a primordial instinct of caution. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Sold, Zelthian finally declared, still processing what had just happened. Lot 7841 Planet Earth to independent trader for 500 million galactic credits. Please proceed to the transfer office to complete the transaction. Thus, in less than 5 minutes, Earth had a new owner. And as the hooded figure rose and walked toward the exit, no one noticed that her steps made absolutely no sound. As if she were accustomed to moving in silence. As if she had spent her entire life hiding in her ship, orbiting far from the main trade routes in a sector of space that galactic maps simply labeled Bhuta's Void. The mysterious buyer finally removed the tunic. She was human. Her name was Isabella Reyes, and she had just bought her own home planet for a fraction of what it was really worth. But the value wasn't in the minerals. It had never been in the minerals. Nova, said Isabella, addressing her ship's artificial intelligence. Confirm the transaction. Confirmed, Captain Isabella Reyes, Nova responded. The AI had a soft but precise voice, designed to sound comforting without being condescending. Earth is officially your property under the Galactic Commerce Code, Article 847, Section 12. Acquisition of abandoned planets. Property documents have been registered in the Central Galactic Database. You have exclusive rights over all planetary resources, including surface, subsurface, orbit, and planetary system up to the outer limit of the Kuiper Belt. Isabella collapsed into her command chair, and for the first time in 15 years allowed her hands to tremble. She had just bought her own home planet, a planet that, according to all official galactic records, had killed her entire species 500 years ago. Nova, seal the ship. Omega Privacy Protocol. No transmissions in or out. Omega Protocol activated, Captain. We are completely isolated. Only then did Isabella allow the tears to fall. Tears of relief, exhaustion, pure emotion. 15 years. 15 years of searching, deception, living under false identities on space stations where one mistake meant death. 15 years collecting evidence fragment by fragment, bribing corrupt officials, hacking databases that were supposedly impossible to penetrate. And now, finally, she had what she needed. The legal right, recognized by the entire galaxy, to reclaim Earth, not as an invader, not as a refugee, but as its legitimate owner. Nova, show me the classified files, the real ones, everything we've collected. The ship's screens lit up, transforming the command cabin into a digital museum of genocide. Documents, videos, audio recordings. Financial transactions, internal emails, extermination orders. Everything carefully cataloged, verified, authenticated. And she had discovered the truth the galaxy had buried. Humans hadn't gone extinct from an ecological collapse. They had been murdered, deliberately, methodically, efficiently. 500 years ago, humanity had achieved something extraordinary, something no other galactic civilization had accomplished: perfect cold fusion. Not the controlled fusion other species used, which required massive reactors and rare fuel, but true cold fusion. Clean, infinite, cheap energy that could be generated in a suitcase-sized device. So cheap it would make the Galactic Energy Corporations, which controlled 40% of all interstellar economy, lose trillions of credits. The Galactic Energy Consortium couldn't allow it. Isabella projected the first document, the one she had been searching for an entire decade before finally finding it in the personal archives of a retired GEC executive who had developed a late conscience. The Omega-level confidential memorandum, dated exactly 501 years ago. The memorandum continued with a coldness that still froze Isabella's blood every time she read it. It was a maximum-level confidential document, addressed to the Board of Directors of the Galactic Energy Consortium. The Competitive Threats Division, with copies to the Legal Division and Covert Operations, had cataloged the human species with absolute red threat code. The document explained with brutal clarity: humanity has developed functional cold fusion technology. Independent analyses confirm it is not a fraud. The technology is real, replicable, and scalable. Economic projections indicate total collapse of the galactic energy market in 20 to 30 standard years if this technology is freely distributed. Projected losses for GEC, 900 billion credits annually. Losses for the total energy sector, 3.2 quadrillion credits in 10 years. We have explored all legal alternatives. Patent purchase, rejected by human government. Exclusive licensing agreements, rejected diplomatic pressure. Ineffective, humans are not members of the Galactic Council. Corporate sabotage, attempted and failed, they have multiple backup copies. Recommendation, preventive elimination of the species through Atmospheric Protocol 7. This protocol will simulate a natural ecological catastrophe of anthropogenic origin. Humans will be blamed for their own extinction. Estimated extinction time, 18 months. Cost, 2 trillion credits. Return on investment, preservation of energy monopoly valued at 900 billion credits annually. ROI, 450,000% risks minimal. Humans have no galactic representation. Their interstellar travel technology is primitive. They have no allies. Their extinction will be briefly lamented and then forgotten. Council vote, 12 in favor, 0 against. 1 abstention approved for immediate implementation. Digital signature, Galactic Energy Consortium. Board of Directors, Isabella felt nauseous every time she read that document. 2 trillion credits. That was the price they put on the extinction of her species. Less than what some galactic magnates spent on personal yachts. The lives of 7 billion people, all of human history, every work of art, every song, every poem, every scientific discovery, all valued at less than the cost of a toy for the ultra-rich. Atmospheric Protocol 7 had been elegant in its cruelty. Nanosprobes specifically designed to operate in Earth's atmosphere, programmed to accelerate specific chemical reactions. They weren't detectable with human technology of the time. They dispersed from commercial satellites that the GEC itself had generously donated to humanity 3 years earlier. Within months, the delicate balance of Earth's atmosphere began to collapse. The greenhouse effect accelerated exponentially. The oceans acidified at a speed that defied all human scientific models. Crops failed. Animals died. The air itself became toxic. Humans, with their characteristic determination, fought. They desperately tried to understand what was happening. Their best scientists worked day and night. But how could they fight something they couldn't see? Something designed by a civilization 1,000 years more advanced specifically to be undetectable. And they died. Billions. In their homes, in the streets, in hospitals that overflowed and collapsed. Entire families, entire cities, entire nations. The last records of official humanity were desperate transmissions asking for help from a universe that had decided it was more profitable to let them die. Almost all. Almost. Nova, said Isabella, her voice barely a whisper. Play video file number 23, the one my great-grandmother recorded. Playing, Captain. Warning, this file always elevates your heart rate and blood pressure. Are you sure? I'm always sure when it comes to her. Play. The central screen transformed, showing blurry images, clearly secretly recorded with improvised equipment. It was a video message, recorded in what appeared to be a massive underground facility. Industrial pipes covered the walls, emergency lights flickered, and in front of the camera, a woman about 40 years old with dark hair tied in a tight bun and eyes shining with absolute determination. This, Isabella murmured, though she had seen this video hundreds of times, was recorded by my great-grandmother, Dr. Mariana Delgado, head of the Salvation Ark Project. When a group of scientists began to realize that the planet was dying too quickly to be natural, she led the investigation. In the video, Dr. Delgado spoke directly to the camera. Her voice was firm, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that made it tremble occasionally. My name is Mariana Delgado. Date, March 15th, 2525, Earth calendar. If you're seeing this, it means several things. First, that we survived. Second, that you found this message in one of our 100 prepared hiding places. And third, that you're one of us, a human. Because only a human would know where to look. Mariana took a deep breath, composing her thoughts. Let me tell you a story. 3 years ago, Earth was fine. Not perfect. We had problems. Climate change, yes. Pollution, yes. But nothing we couldn't handle. Our models said we had time. Decades to transition to clean energy to repair the damage. And then, in 6 months, everything changed. Global temperature rose 5 degrees. The oceans began to die. The air became poisonous. And none of our models could explain it. It was as if the laws of physics had changed. The doctor moved closer to the camera, and now her eyes shone not only with determination, but with fury. But some of us suspected. I suspected, because we had just announced functional cold fusion 2 years earlier, and suddenly, our planet was dying in ways that defied all logic. So we investigated, in secret. While the world died around us, while billions died, a team of 50 scientists investigated. And we found the nanosprobes, buried in air samples from 3 years ago. Technology that wasn't ours. Technology we couldn't have created with another 100 years of development. Alien technology. A pause. On screen, Mariana wiped away a tear, but her voice remained firm. They killed us. The Galactic Energy Consortium killed us. And they did it in the most cowardly way possible. They made it look like we killed ourselves. So the galaxy could point at our corpses and say, "See what happens when a civilization is irresponsible." But not all of us died. Because as soon as we knew the truth, we initiated the Salvation Ark project. The camera pulled back, showing the vast facility behind Mariana. Kilometers of tunnels, massive hydroponics, fusion reactors, housing for thousands. The Ark project has 3 phases. Phase 1, survival. We've built 100 underground cities like this, each with capacity for 50,000 people. 5 million humans in total. It's less than 0.1% of our population, but it's the best we could do with the time we had. We selected based on diverse skills, diverse genetics, and something more important: the will to survive. Phase 2, evidence. We've collected irrefutable proof of who did this to us and why. Physical nanosprobes, hacked GEC files, communication recordings. Everything is hidden in locations only humans can find. Because only we know our history, our cultural references, the places we love. We've turned our own extinction into the galaxy's greatest puzzle. And only we have the answers. Mariana approached the camera one last time, her eyes looking directly through time toward whoever was watching. Phase 3, justice. Our descendants, maybe you, will strike back. But not with violence, not with vengeful genocide. Because if we do that, we become them. No, we'll strike back with something much more devastating to a society that prides itself on being civilized: the truth. To whoever is seeing this in the future, know this: you are Phase 3. Use the evidence we collected. Expose the GEC and all who were complicit, and then let them see what it feels like when the entire universe turns against them. Let them experience the ostracism they planned for us. But above all, and here Mariana's voice softened, almost maternal, keep humanity alive. Not just biologically, but spiritually. Don't let 500 years of hiding underground turn you into monsters. Keep loving. Keep creating art. Keep making music, poetry, science. Keep being human. Because that's what really scares the universe about us. Not our technology, but our humanity. My name is Mariana Delgado. And if you're seeing this, it means they didn't destroy us. They only made us stronger. The video ended. Isabella had seen it hundreds of times. Her great-grandmother had died 2 years after recording that message, from a disease the underground medical facilities couldn't cure. But her legacy lived on. The Ark project had worked. 100 underground cities, each an engineering marvel. Life support systems that recycled everything. Massive hydroponic farms. Cold fusion reactors providing unlimited energy. 5 million humans living in secret under a planet the rest of the galaxy believed dead. Living, waiting, planning, building, and above all, remembering. Nova, show me current numbers. The complete census. Statistics appeared on screen, and each number was a silent triumph against extinction. The Ark Project status report for year 500 post-collapse showed remarkable statistics. Total population had grown to 847,293,147 humans. 100 underground cities remained distributed across all continents except Antarctica, which had been converted into a research facility. The population remained completely hidden from all galactic species. Population health stood at 98.7%, superior to the pre-collapse human average. Education showed 100% literacy rate, with 87% achieving higher education. Technology was estimated 300 years more advanced than current galactic average. The underground economy was completely self-sufficient based on cold fusion energy. Food production reached 120% of needs, with surplus being stored. Military resources included a fleet of 10,000 warships hidden in Kuiper Belt asteroids. 2,347 human agents lived covertly in 89 different galactic civilizations. 127 Earth languages were actively maintained. Cultural archives contained 99.97% of all pre-collapse human knowledge digitized and preserved. Isabella smiled through her tears. Her ancestors hadn't wasted 500 years lamenting in darkness. They had been building a completely new civilization. They had been learning from past mistakes. They had been meticulously preparing for this exact moment, and above all, they had been collecting evidence. Every GEC transmission intercepted, every stolen document, every deathbed confession from a guilty corporate executive. Everything cataloged, verified, authenticated to the highest galactic legal standard. For 500 years, humanity had been patient. They had waited for the right moment. They had waited for the GEC to become complacent, to believe they had gotten away with their genocide. They had waited for enough generations to pass so the original perpetrators were dead or retired, unable to destroy evidence, and they had waited for someone like Isabella to be born. Someone willing to spend 15 years of her life in deep space, living under false identities, collecting the final pieces of the puzzle. "Nova," said Isabella, her voice now firm, tears dried, replaced by steel determination. "Contact the Arc Council using encrypted quantum channel. Authentication code, Mariana Delta Phoenix. Establishing quantum connection." "Please wait." Seconds later, the screen filled with 100 different faces. The Arc Council, representatives from each of the 100 underground cities. Men and women of all ages, all skin tones, all preserved Earth cultures. United by a singular purpose. "Council," said Isabella, and her voice resonated with the weight of 500 years of waiting. "Phase 2 is complete. I have all the evidence, all of it, and I just legally purchased Earth. We have legal rights recognized by the Galactic Council over our own planet." A murmur of emotion ran through the 100 screens. "It's time," Isabella continued, "for Phase 3. It's time for the universe to know the truth. It's time for justice." The oldest member of the council, a 90-year-old man named Kenji Nakamura, spoke with a trembling voice. "Are you absolutely certain, Isabella? Once we begin, there's no turning back. The galaxy will never be the same." "I know," Isabella responded. "And that's exactly the point. My great-grandmother said they didn't destroy us. They only made us stronger. It's time for the universe to see how strong they made us. A vote, 100 cities, 100 votes. And for the first time in 500 years, humanity voted not on survival, but on revelation. Unanimity. Yes. Then it's decided," Nakamura declared. "Let Phase 3 begin. Let the galaxy know what was done to humanity, and let them tremble at the consequences." 3 months later, at the Central Galactic News Station, an orbital structure the size of a small moon that broadcast to 3 trillion intelligent beings daily, the galaxy's most famous journalist was about to begin her nightly news program. Her name was Jariel of the Thal Federation, and in her 120 years of career, she had covered interstellar wars, first contacts, civilization collapses. She was known for her integrity, her refusal to be bought by corporate interests, and her fanatic dedication to truth. She was in many ways exactly the type of journalist Mariana Delgado had hoped would exist 500 years later. 5 minutes to broadcast, said her producer, an insectoid Crix being named Tic-Tac. Jariel reviewed her notes. Tonight's lead story, a trade treaty between the Thal Federation and the Vrexian Empire. Important but routine. Exactly the type of news she covered constantly, and then her terminal emitted a beep. A specific beep that only sounded when someone had sent a data package using top-level verification codes. Codes only possessed by heads of state, Galactic Council leaders, and... "What is this?" asked Jariel, touching the terminal with her long, elegant fingers. Tic-Tac approached, his antennae trembling. "I don't know, but the codes are verifying." "Omega level. Whoever sent this has access to the galaxy's most secure systems." "The codes are... Wait, these codes are 500 years old." "What?" "These authentication codes were issued 500 years ago. But they're being used now. And they verify. Whatever we're seeing, it's authentic." Curious, and with a tingle of anticipation she only felt when a truly important story was about to break. Jariel opened the file. What she saw left her completely frozen. Her three hearts, characteristic of the Thal, began beating in unison, something that only happened in moments of extreme shock. GEC documents. Thousands of them. Internal memoranda detailing the genocide of humans. Extermination orders signed by the board of directors. Bank transfers showing exactly how much they had paid for the nanosprobes. Videos of secret meetings where executives laughed while planning the genocide of an entire species. And even more shocking, a complete list of all species that had been preventively eliminated by the GEC in the last 1,000 years. Humans weren't the first. They weren't the second. They were the 13th. 13 civilizations. 13 intelligent species, all exterminated for purely economic reasons. Is this real? Jariel whispered, though she already knew the answer. The authentication codes were impossible to forge. Each document had genetic signatures from the executives who had created them. Each video had metadata impossible to replicate. The codes verify perfectly, confirmed Tic-Tac, his chirping voice full of horror. Every file, every document, everything is authentic, by the ancient stars, Jariel. This is real. The GEC really committed genocide, Jariel finished. 13 times, and got away with it. 2 minutes to broadcast, announced an automated voice. Jariel looked at her producer. Tic-Tac looked back. Both understood the magnitude of the moment. If they broadcast this, they would change the galaxy forever. The GEC was one of the most powerful corporations in the known universe. They had private armies. They had entire governments on their payroll. They could destroy careers, ruin lives. But there were also 13 species that deserved justice. 13 civilizations that had been erased from existence because they dared to innovate. And there's more, said Tic-Tac, his voice barely audible. Look at this. It was a live video. A real-time transmission. It showed Earth's surface, except the surface was no longer toxic. The sky was beginning to clear, showing blue between the clouds. Brilliant cities emerged from underground, massive structures of metal and crystal rising toward the sky. Spaceships were taking off, hundreds of them, their trails bright against the Earth's dawn. And on the surface, millions of figures, bipeds, humans, alive, walking under a sky slowly returning to life. The camera focused on one in particular, a woman about 30 years old in a captain's uniform, standing at what appeared to be the entrance to a massive underground city. Behind her, thousands of humans emerged to the surface, many crying as they saw the open sky for the first time in their lives. The woman looked directly at the camera and spoke in perfect common galactic language. My name is Isabella Reyes. I am human. I am captain of the human reconnaissance fleet, and my species is not extinct. She paused, letting those words settle. 500 years ago, the Galactic Energy Consortium murdered us. They killed 7 billion of us because we developed perfect cold fusion, because our technology threatened their profits, and they did it in the most cowardly way possible. They made it look like we destroyed ourselves, but not all of us died. 5 million survived, and in 500 years underground we grew. We learned, we prepared, and we collected evidence. Tonight we deliver that evidence to the galactic people. All the documents, all the videos, all the memoranda. Everything is being transmitted right now to all major news networks, to all governments, to the entire Galactic Council. The galaxy will know what the GEC did to humanity, and it will know we weren't the first. We were the 13th. Isabella's eyes hardened. To the Galactic Energy Consortium, we don't seek vengeance. We seek justice. We won't destroy your facilities or kill your employees, but we will expose every crime, every conspiracy, every life you took for corporate profits. And to the galaxy, ask yourselves, if they did this to 13 species, how many more are on their list? How many innovations were suppressed? How much progress was sacrificed at the altar of corporate profits? My name is Isabella Reyes, and in the name of the 7 billion humans they murdered, in the name of the 12 species they exterminated before us, we declare that the silence is over. The transmission ended. 30 seconds, said the automated voice. Jariel looked at Tic-Tac. If we broadcast this, we're journalists, Tic-Tac interrupted. This is the biggest story in 1,000 years. We have to broadcast it. The GEC will destroy us. Let them try. But they can't destroy the truth. Not once 3 trillion beings have seen it. Jariel took a deep breath. She thought of her mentor, who had taught her that journalism exists to give voice to the voiceless. To expose truth regardless of cost. 10 seconds. Broadcast everything, said Jariel firmly. Every document. Every video. Everything. And may the gods help us. We're live in 5, 4, 3. Jariel turned to the camera, composing her face into the professional mask she had perfected over a century. Good evening, Galaxy. Tonight I won't have my regular program. Tonight, I have a story that will change everything you thought you knew about our galactic civilization. What followed were 4 uninterrupted hours of broadcasting. Jariel showed everything. Every document, every video, every piece of evidence Isabella and 500 years of humans had collected. She couldn't help it. It wasn't just the biggest story of her career. It was the biggest story of any career in all recorded galactic history. And they watched. 3 trillion intelligent beings across the galaxy, belonging to 300 different species. They watched on space stations and colonial planets. They watched in core worlds and on the furthest frontiers. They watched in their homes, workplaces, schools. They saw GEC executives coldly planning the murder of 7 billion humans, laughing about how much money they would save. They saw digitally signed extermination orders. They saw bank transfers. They saw GEC scientists designing nanosprobes specifically to make it look like a natural ecological collapse. And they saw the list. The complete list of the 13 exterminated species. The Gendari had invented quantum agriculture. Exterminated 847 years ago by the Galactic Agricultural Consortium. The Kelthor developed perfect regenerative medicine. Exterminated 723 years ago by the pharmaceutical cartel. The Yvrathi created instant molecular construction. Exterminated 654 years ago by the Manufacturing Corporation. The Peltari discovered faster-than-light travel without fuel. Exterminated 598 years ago by the Transport Consortium. The Kixtal invented biological quantum computing. Exterminated 531 years ago by the Technology Corporation, and so it continued. 13 species, 13 genocides, all for the same reason. They innovated in ways that threatened corporate profits. Within 24 hours, 3 trillion beings had seen the evidence. And the galaxy entered collective shock. Stock markets in 50 star systems froze as panic spread. Governments issued emergency declarations. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 200 years, and the CEO of the Galactic Energy Consortium, a crystalline being named Zorvath, who had inherited the position from his predecessor, attempted damage control. Their forgeries. He transmitted from his orbital office, his facets glowing with something that might have been panic. The humans are lying! They're trying to extort us. This is an elaborate conspiracy. Jariel, still Lev, responded immediately. Then explain this, CEO Zorvath. She showed a document, an extermination order with genetic signature. The genetic signature belonged to Zorvath's great-grandfather, who had been CEO 500 years ago. This genetic signature is perfect. It has been verified by 10 independent laboratories. Your great-grandfather signed the order to exterminate humanity. Do you claim this is also false? Zorvath didn't respond. He couldn't. The genetic signature was impossible to forge with known technology. GEC stock fell 99% in 3 hours. 12 galactic governments issued immediate arrest warrants for all consortium executives. 40 star systems froze all GEC assets within their jurisdictions. But the most devastating thing wasn't the economic collapse. It was the collective understanding spreading through the galaxy like a shockwave that their enlightened civilization had allowed corporations to commit genocide repeatedly for 1,000 years, and no one had done anything to stop it, because no one knew. The GEC had been so perfect in their cover-ups that each extinction appeared natural or self-inflicted, until now. The Kelthor, whose surviving population of only 2 million lived in exile on remote space stations, issued a statement. We thought we were alone. We thought we were the only ones stupid enough to destroy ourselves with our own medicine. Now we know the truth. We were murdered. Like the humans. Like 11 more species, the Yvrathi. Barely 50,000 survivors hidden in underground colonies on remote moons. Transmitted, we have lived with shame for 600 years, believing we were responsible for our own extinction. Now we know we were murdered, and the killer still walks free. And so, species after species, Survivors of the 13 genocides began to speak. They began to share their stories. And the galaxy began to understand the magnitude of the crime. It wasn't just the murder of billions. It was the theft of potential. 13 species, each with revolutionary technology that could have improved life for everyone in the galaxy. All silenced because corporations valued profits over progress. How many cures for diseases were lost when they exterminated the Kelthor? How much hunger could have been eliminated with the Gendari's quantum agriculture? How much more advanced would the galaxy be if human cold fusion had been shared 500 years ago? The galaxy began asking these questions, and the more they asked, the more furious they became. Isabella was back on Earth, standing in what had been Arc City War 1 but had now been renamed New Hope, when she received the call she had been waiting for. "Captain Reyes," said a formal, elderly voice. "I am First Counselor Corvile of the Thal Federation. The complete Galactic Council would like to meet with you." Isabella looked through the window of her improvised office toward the city spreading below. Humans walking on open streets for the first time in their lives. Children who had never seen the real sky, now playing under the clouds. Elderly people crying as they felt the wind on their faces. "To arrest me for defamation?" Isabella asked with a touch of sarcasm, though she knew the answer. There was a pause. When Corvile spoke again, his voice was filled with something Isabella didn't expect. Shame. "To apologize," Corvile said softly. "And to offer you something that should have been offered 500 years ago, justice." 1 week later, Isabella Reyes stood before the complete Galactic Council, 300 species representing 700 civilizations. The same hall where, 500 years earlier, humanity had applied for membership and been rejected because they weren't advanced enough. Now, that hall was full of beings who couldn't look her in the eyes. "Captain Reyes," Corvile began, his voice resonating in the vast space. He was an elderly Thal, over 200 years old, whose skin had taken on the silver tone of advanced age. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, on behalf of all species represented here, we offer our deepest and most sincere apologies." He paused, as if the next words caused him physical pain. "Your species was the victim of the most terrible corruption our galactic civilization has known. The Galactic Energy Consortium, along with other corporations, committed crimes against intelligent life that defy all description. And they did it under our supervision, on our watch, with our systems of government. The GEC has been formally dissolved by unanimous vote of this council. Its assets, valued at approximately 450 trillion galactic credits, have been completely confiscated. The 42 executives still alive who signed extermination orders have been arrested and faced genocide trials. We would like to offer you those 450 trillion credits as partial compensation for the genocide your species suffered." The hall fell silent. 450 trillion credits. It was more money than most planets would see in 1,000 years. It was enough to rebuild Earth 100 times. Isabella stared at them. She looked at each of the 300 representatives. She saw guilt on some faces, shame on others, fear on some. But she also saw curiosity. They wanted to see how the human would react. "Partial compensation?" Isabella asked, her voice quiet but cutting. "Do you think money compensates for 7 billion lives? Does it compensate for 500 years of hiding like rats under our own planet? For generations of children who never saw the sky? For all the art, music, literature, scientific discoveries that never happened because the humans who would have created them died suffocating in their own atmospheres?" Each word hit the hall like a hammer. Isabella took a step forward. "Does it compensate for the fact that my great-grandmother died at 45 from a curable disease because our underground medical facilities weren't sufficient? That my grandmother never knew her mother? That entire generations of humans were born, lived, and died without knowing what it was to see a real sunset?" Corvile lowered his head. No, Captain Reyes, nothing can compensate for that. But it's a beginning, and it's all we have to offer." Isabella took a deep breath. She had practiced this moment for months. She knew exactly what she was going to say. "There's something else I want," she said firmly. "What?" asked Corvile, almost with relief, as if anything she asked for would be preferable to the condemnation in her eyes. "I want each species on this council to dedicate the equivalent of 10% of their GDP for the next 100 years to a special fund. A fund dedicated exclusively to identifying and protecting emerging civilizations from corporate predation. I want independent inspectors, I want laws that make it impossible for what happened to us to happen again. And I want those laws to have teeth. Any corporation found guilty of interfering with the natural development of a species will be completely dissolved, with all its executives facing genocide charges. The murmurs began immediately. 10% of GDP for 100 years. It was astronomical. Captain Reyes, a Rexian representative, intervened. A massive reptilian being. That's approximately 90 quadrillion credits in total. 90 quadrillion. You're asking for more money than the entire galactic economy generates in a decade. Exactly, said Isabella, without blinking. That's what it costs to do things right. That's what it costs to ensure no other species has to hide underground for 500 years because they dared to innovate. That's what your collective conscience costs. She looked around the hall. And if you think it's too much, she continued, her voice becoming harder, then let me remind you of something. We have all the evidence, all of it, not just about the 13 genocides. We also have evidence of another 47 species the GEC was monitoring for possible elimination. 47 species that still exist, that are still alive. That could be on their target list right now. I can make that list public. I can tell each of those 47 species they're in danger. And then you can explain to them why you didn't want to spend 90 quadrillion credits to protect them. The silence was absolute. Isabella had played her strongest card. And everyone in the hall knew she wasn't bluffing. Do you accept or not? Isabella asked simply. There were debates. Heated arguments. Some representatives insisted it was too much. Others argued it was the minimum they could do. Some pointed out their economies would collapse under such a burden. Others responded they deserved to collapse if they couldn't prevent corporate genocides. But in the end, under the gaze of billions of beings who had seen the broadcasts, under the weight of their own collective guilt for allowing this to happen, under the implicit threat that humanity could reveal even more dark secrets, the Council voted 300 species, 700 civilizations, unanimity. Yes. Corvile stood, his face showing a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The Emerging Species Protection Protocol is officially ratified. 90 quadrillion credits over 100 years. Independent inspectors. Laws with penalties of corporate dissolution and genocide charges. All according to your terms, Captain Reyes. Isabella nodded. One more thing, yes? The 450 trillion in GEC assets. I don't want them for humanity. I want them divided equally among the 13 species that were exterminated. 35 trillion for each. To help them rebuild. The hall was shocked. Isabella had just rejected 450 trillion credits. Are you sure? Asked Corvile. Completely. Humanity doesn't want blood money. We want justice. And we want the other 12 species to know we're not doing this just for ourselves. We're doing it for all the GEC's victims. Corvile blinked, and something that might have been respect appeared in his ancient eyes. So be it. 5 years later, Earth was unrecognizable. With human cold fusion technology now being freely shared with all galactic species, energy prices had fallen 95% across the galaxy. Civilizations that once struggled for resources now prospered. Entire planets that had been considered uninhabitable were now being terraformed using cheap, unlimited energy. The galactic economy experienced what historians would later call the fusion renaissance. New technologies flourished. Space exploration accelerated. Average quality of life increased 300% in just 5 years, and all because of technology that had been suppressed for 500 years was finally released. Isabella walked through the streets of New Hope, a city that now extended both on the surface and below it, a perfect blend of the underground facilities that had kept them alive and the new structures reaching toward the sky. Humans and aliens now walked together. There were embassies from 50 different species. Schools where human children learned alongside Thal, Vrexian, Kelthor children. Earth had become more than a planet. It had become a symbol, the place where the galaxy had learned its most painful lesson, that unchecked capitalism, that profits without ethics, could be as deadly as any weapon of war. Captain Reyes, a voice called behind her. Isabella turned. It was a young Vral, barely more than an adolescent by his species' standards. The Vral had been one of the species that had tried to buy Earth at that auction 5 years ago. My name is Thalrek Vas Vral, the young one said, his 4 eyes showing something that seemed like nervous admiration. I'm a student at the new intergalactic university here. I'm studying, I want to study human resistance ethics, how your species survived for 500 years without losing your humanity. Could I Could I learn from you? Isabella smiled. It was a question she received frequently now. Of course, Thalrek, but I warn you, we don't teach vengeance. We don't teach hate. We teach justice. We teach that even in the darkest moments, there's a difference between survival and humanity. That's exactly the difference I want to learn. Thalrek responded fervently. My species, we almost bought your planet for mining. If we had discovered you were still alive, I don't know how we would have reacted. I want to learn how you maintained your compassion after so much suffering. Come, said Isabella, beginning to walk. I'll show you something. She led him through the city, past parks where trees finally grew again under the open sky, past markets where products from 100 different worlds were sold, until they reached a special place. The Monument to the Fallen. It was a crystal structure 1 kilometer high that rose toward the sky, visible from any point in New Hope. And on that crystal, engraved with atomic precision laser technology, were written 7 billion names. Every human who had died during Atmospheric Protocol 7. This, Isabella said softly, is why we survived. Not for vengeance, but so their names would never be forgotten. Thalrek looked up, overwhelmed by the monument's immensity. There are so many— 7 billion, Isabella confirmed. My great-grandmother is here. Section 7, subsection 1 and 42, Dr. Mariana Delgado. She never saw the sky after the collapse. She spent her last years underground, working day and night to ensure we survived. Isabella touched the crystal, finding her great-grandmother's name among millions. We did it, great-grandmother, she whispered, not with violence, with truth, exactly as you said. A tear fell down her cheek, crystallizing momentarily in the cold air before falling to the ground. And I promise you this, as long as humanity exists, we'll ensure no other species has to make the same trade we made. 500 years of darkness, for a future where no one has to hide to survive. 100 years after the revelation, the Intergalactic University of Historical Studies, now located in New Hope, Earth, organized its largest annual conference. The theme, the human trade, how one species changed the galaxy. The lead professor was a third-generation post-revelation human named Natalia Santos Reyes, Isabella's great-granddaughter. She was 35 years old, with her ancestors' dark hair but the green eyes of her other Thal great-grandmother. Because in 100 years, humanity had truly integrated with the galactic community. Mixed marriages were common now. Hybrid children, human Thal, human Kelthor, human Yvrathi filled the schools. Ladies and gentlemen of all species. Natalia began before an auditorium of 5,000 students from 100 different species. Today, we'll talk about the moment when the galaxy learned, a lesson that should have been obvious, that the price of greed can be incalculable. She projected a holographic image of Earth before Atmospheric Protocol 7, blue, green, beautiful, shining oceans, white clouds, continents covered in forests. This was Earth 600 years ago, a prosperous planet with 7 billion inhabitants, a civilization on the threshold of joining the galactic community. And then, in 18 months, all this was destroyed. The image changed, showing Earth during the collapse. Gray skies, green oceans, abandoned cities. For this, she showed the GEC memorandum. 2 trillion credits. That was the cost of exterminating my species. Less than what some of you will pay for your complete university education. An uncomfortable murmur ran through the auditorium. My ancestor, Captain Isabella Reyes, once said something that has become famous in all star systems. It's engraved at the entrance of this building. It says, "We don't want vengeance. We want to ensure the galaxy never forgets that behind every corporate decision, behind every profit calculation, there are real lives, real people, real families." A Kelthor student in the 5th row raised an extremity. Professor Santos Reyes, my species was one of those exterminated by the pharmaceutical cartel. We also survived in secret, only 2 million of us. Why didn't the humans help us before the revelation? It was a question Natalia received at every conference, and each time it hurt to answer. Because, she responded honestly, we didn't know of your existence until after the revelation. That's one of our greatest sorrows. One of the things that hurts me most when I teach this history. She approached the Kelthor student, looking at him directly. If we had known you also survived, that the Yvrathi survived, that the Gendari survived, we would have shared everything with you. Our technology, our plans, our evidence. But the GEC was so effective in their cover-up that each surviving species thought they were alone. We thought we were the only ones lucky or prepared enough to survive. But now we do share. The Emerging Species Protection Protocol, funded by that 100-year agreement my ancestor negotiated, has saved 47 civilizations from being preventively eliminated in the last decade. 47 species that still breathe, that still create, that still love. Because my ancestor decided truth was more powerful than vengeance. Another student. This time a young Thal with skin still the bright blue of youth raised her hand. Professor, my question is more personal. You're part human, part Thal. Your great-grandmother was completely human. Did you ever wish they had chosen vengeance? That they had used their superior technology to destroy those who destroyed them? Natalia considered the question carefully. It was one she had asked herself many times. Do you know how many GEC executives were murdered after the revelation? 0. Do you know why? Because humans ensured they were properly tried. 42 were convicted in legitimate courts, with verified evidence, with legal defenders. All are serving life sentences. That's justice. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Vengeance would have been easy. My great-grandmother had a fleet of 10,000 warships hidden in the Kuiper Belt. She had technology 300 years more advanced than the galactic average. She could have razed every GEC facility in a week. She could have turned their core worlds to ashes. But then, what would have differentiated us from them? They killed for money. If we had killed for vengeance, would we be better? No, my great-grandmother chose the hard path. She chose to demonstrate that even after 500 years of suffering, after seeing the names of 7 billion of our dead engraved in crystal, we were still better than those who harmed us. A human student in the front row, no older than 20, spoke. But Professor, don't you feel rage? When you look at that monument, when you see all those names, don't you want vengeance? Natalia smiled sadly. Of course I feel rage. All humans do. It's part of who we are. But my great-grandmother taught us something important. The difference between feeling rage and acting on that rage. Between thirsting for vengeance and choosing justice. She used to say, vengeance is hot. It burns you inside. It consumes you. It turns you into what you hate. But justice is cold. It's patient. It's precise. And when it finally comes, it's permanent. Natalia projected a new image. The Emerging Species Protection Protocol Agreement. Signed by 300 species. That, she concluded, was the true trade. 500 years of darkness, of living like ghosts under our own planet, of generations who were born and died without seeing the sky, all in exchange for a future where no species has to fear being preventively eliminated for innovating. That's humanity's legacy. And that's the future all of you will inherit. The auditorium fell silent for a moment. And then, starting with a Yevrathi student in the back row, then spreading through the species, applause began. It wasn't polite or obligatory applause. It was genuine applause, the kind that comes from recognizing a fundamental truth. The applause lasted 10 full minutes. And when it finally ended, Natalia saw something that filled her with hope. Tears in the eyes of students from a dozen different species. Because they understood. They understood the sacrifice. They understood the cost. And they understood why it had been worth it. After the conference, Natalia found herself in her favorite place. A small cafe on the New Hope space station, orbiting Earth at 400 kilometers altitude. It was a modest place, with capacity for only 30 people, but it had the best views of Earth of any establishment in orbit. She wasn't alone. Once a month, without fail, 3 people met here. It was a tradition that had begun 90 years ago, and would continue until the last of them died. Natalia Santos Reyes, history professor, 35 years old. Half human, half Thal. Thalrekvas Viral, now 105 years old. Chief judge of the Galactic Corporate Ethics Tribunal. The same young Viral who had met Isabella 100 years ago. And Jariel of Thal, now 220 years old, retired decades ago, but still the galaxy's most respected journalist. The woman who had broadcast the truth when doing so meant risking everything. I sometimes wonder, said Jariel, her voice weak but clear, her 3 hearts beating with the slow rhythm of advanced age. What would have happened if Isabella had chosen to keep cold fusion technology secret? If humans had decided to dominate the galaxy instead of sharing? My great-grandmother would never have done that, Natalia responded, pouring more Thalian tea for the elderly journalist. She didn't even consider it. Do you know why? Why? asked Thalrek, who, despite his advanced age, still worked 6 days a week judging corporate ethics cases. Because the real price, Natalia said softly, wasn't what they took from us. It was what we refused to lose. What? Asked Jariel, though she suspected the answer. Our humanity, Natalia said simply. Literally. 500 years underground could have turned us into something cold, bitter, thirsting for vengeance. Could have turned us into soulless survivors, obsessed only with revenge, but our ancestors ensured it didn't happen. They built schools underground where children learned not just science, but art, music, poetry, philosophy. They built theaters where plays by Shakespeare and Lope de Vega were performed. They built museums that preserved every painting, every sculpture, every photograph of the surface Earth. They ensured we kept loving, that we kept laughing, that we kept dreaming, that we kept believing the universe could be better, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Natalia looked out the window toward Earth below. From here it looked perfectly restored, blue and green, alive. That was the true trade. We didn't sell our humanity for survival. We preserved it despite the cost. Jariel raised her cup with trembling hands. To Isabella Reyes, who taught us that true power isn't the capacity to destroy, but the will to build. To Mariana Delgado, Thalrek added, raising his, who planned 500 years into the future and never lost hope. And to all the humans who died. Natalia concluded, her voice breaking slightly as she raised her own cup. The 7 billion whose names are engraved in crystal. Because we'll never forget they paid the price so we could be here. The 3 cups touched with a soft clink. Outside, through the cafe windows, Earth shone in all its restored glory. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans gleamed under the sun. The green masses of continents showed forests that had taken 100 years to fully recover. Cities glowed with lights that no longer polluted, powered by clean, infinite cold fusion. And somewhere on that surface, in New Hope, stood the monument to the fallen. 1 kilometer of crystal with 7 billion names, a permanent reminder, visible from space, that progress has a cost, that justice requires patience, and that humanity, in all its meanings, is always worth protecting. That night, alone in her apartment overlooking Earth, Natalia reviewed the family archives she had inherited, videos, diaries, letters, audio recordings, the complete story of how her family had survived 500 years of darkness. There was one in particular she always returned to. The last message Isabella Reyes had recorded before her death. 50 years ago, her great-grandmother had lived to 80, had seen Earth restore itself, had seen humanity fully integrate into galactic society. And in her last days, she had recorded a message for her descendants. Natalia played it now, as she did whenever she needed to remember why all this mattered. On screen, Isabella appeared. She was 80 years old, but her eyes still shone with that same iron determination. She was sitting in her garden in New Hope, with the real blue sky behind her. If you're seeing this, Isabella began, it's because I've died, and I hope it was in a comfortable bed, surrounded by family, under an open sky. That would have been a good ending. She smiled, that smile Natalia had inherited. I want to tell you a story. The real story of the last trade, not the version they teach in schools. The real version. When I stood before the Galactic Council, when I demanded 90 quadrillion credits over 100 years, when I rejected the 450 trillion, everyone thought it was noble, brave, an act of supreme altruism. But the truth is more complicated. The truth is I was afraid. Natalia leaned forward. She had never heard her great-grandmother admit fear. I was afraid that if we accepted that money, if we enriched ourselves with the blood of our dead, we would become what we hated. I was afraid the money would corrupt us, turn us into another powerful corporation that valued profits over lives. I was afraid that 500 years of survival in darkness hadn't been enough to teach us humility, that once we had real power we would use it as badly as the GEC used theirs. So I rejected it. Not because I was noble, but because I was afraid of what we would do to ourselves if we accepted it. Isabella looked directly at the camera, through time toward her descendants. And it turned out to be the right decision. Not because it was morally superior, but because it forced us to build our future the right way. Slowly, with effort. Sharing our technology freely instead of selling it. Becoming part of the galactic community instead of its masters. The last trade wasn't sacrificing 500 years for justice. It was sacrificing immense wealth for integrity. It was choosing who we wanted to be over what we could have had. And I want you to remember this, whoever is watching. Every generation will face its own trade, its own choice between the easy and the right, between power and principles, between profits and people. And when you face that choice, I hope you remember, money is temporary. Power is fleeting. But who you are, your integrity, your humanity, that's the only thing you truly possess. And once you sell it, you can never get it back. Isabella smiled one last time. My name was Isabella Reyes. I bought Earth for 500 million credits. I rejected 450 trillion more, and I don't regret anything. Because thanks to those decisions, I died knowing my descendants would live in a better galaxy. One where corporations can't murder with impunity. Where innovation is celebrated, not suppressed. Where justice matters more than profits. That's what we really bought with the last trade, not vengeance, not wealth, but a future worth living. And if you, my descendant, are seeing this, then the trade was worth it, because you're still here, you're still alive, and you're still human. The video ended. Natalia sat in silence for a long time, looking at the dark screen, feeling the weight of the decisions her great-grandmother had made a century ago. Outside, Earth spun silently. On its surface, 850 million humans slept, worked, loved, lived. Alongside them, another 200 million aliens who had chosen to make Earth their home. A truly intergalactic world, and in orbit, on asteroids, on Jupiter and Saturn's moons, another 3 billion humans had built new homes. Humanity was no longer confined to a single planet. They could never be exterminated so easily again. But more important than the numbers was something more intangible. Humans had become the moral heart of the galactic community. When disputes arose over corporate ethics, human judges were consulted. When new species were discovered, human teams made first contact. Because they were trusted to respect and protect newcomers. Because everyone remembered the lesson humanity had taught, that surviving isn't enough. That the true measure of a civilization isn't its technology or wealth, but how it treats those who can't defend themselves. Natalia finally stood, walked to the window, and placed her hand against the cold glass. Below, Earth shone her home. Her ancestors' home. The place where everything had begun and almost ended. The trade was worth it, great-grandmother, she whispered to the void of space. It was worth every year of those 500, because it gave us this. And this was more than just survival. It was a galaxy where no other species would have to hide for 500 years. Where innovation was celebrated instead of punished. Where corporations feared justice more than competition. It was a future worth having. In a small town in what had been Brazil, in a house built in the classic 21st century style but with 27th century technology, lived the last human who had been born before the collapse. His name was Miguel Santos. He was 512 years old, kept alive by regenerative medicine the Kelthor had shared after the revelation. He was a 7-year-old boy when the collapse began. He remembered the sky turning gray. He remembered his mother crying when they were told they had to go underground. He remembered the first days in Arc City 47, the fear, the confusion, the crying of millions of children who didn't understand why the world was ending. Now, sitting on his porch, he looked at the clean blue sky. His great-grandchildren played in the garden. One was half human, half Kelthor. Another was half human, half Yvrathi. The third was completely human, but her husband was Thal. Miguel smiled. This was what they had survived for. Grandfather Miguel, his youngest great-granddaughter called, the one who was half Yvrathi, running toward him with something in her hands. Look what I found! It was a flower, a simple wildflower. But for Miguel, who had spent the first 500 years of his life without seeing a single flower grow naturally under the real sun, it was a miracle. It's beautiful, little Arya, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Why are you crying, grandfather? Because I remember when there were no flowers, he answered simply. When everything was dead. And now look, life, everywhere. Arya, only 6 years old, couldn't really comprehend. For her, flowers had always existed. The sky had always been blue. Earth had always been alive, and that, Miguel thought, was exactly the point. That for this generation, and all those to come, the tragedy was history. The pain was a memory, and life was normal. Tell me the story again. Arya asked, sitting at his feet. The story of the last trade. It was her favorite story. Miguel had told it to her hundreds of times, but he never tired of telling it. Long ago, Miguel began, there was a species called humans, and they were almost destroyed. But they survived. And when they had the chance to take revenge, to destroy those who had destroyed them, they did something different. They chose justice. They chose to build a better future instead of punishing the past. Why? Arya asked, with that infinite curiosity of children. Because, Miguel responded, they understood something important. They understood you can win a battle with violence, but you can only win peace with justice. They understood the true trade wasn't exchanging one thing for another. It was choosing who they wanted to be over who circumstances forced them to be. I don't understand, Arya admitted. Miguel laughed softly. You'll understand someday, when you're older, when you face your own difficult choice. And I hope when that day comes you remember this story and choose to be who you want to be, not who circumstances force you to be. He picked up Arya in his arms, something his 512-year-old rejuvenated body could easily do now. Do you know what's most beautiful about the last trade? He asked. What? That it worked. Look around. Humans, Kelthor, Yvrathi, Thal, Rexian, all living together, learning together, loving together. That never would have been possible if we had chosen vengeance. But because we chose justice, chose truth, chose to build instead of destroy, now we have this. Arya looked around the garden, seeing her half-Kelthor brother playing with her human brother, seeing her human mother and Yvrathi father preparing dinner together. It's pretty, she said simply. Yes, Miguel agreed, tears running down his 512-year-old face. Yes, it is. And it was worth every year of those 500 in darkness, worth every sacrifice, every tear, every loss. Because now, when I look at my great-grandchildren, I see the future my great-grandmother Mariana dreamed of. I see the future Captain Isabella fought to create. I see the future 7 billion humans died for. And it's beautiful. Epilogue. 1,000 years later, in the year 3525, 1,000 years after the genocide, the galaxy was unrecognizable compared to what it had been. The Emerging Species Protection Protocol had saved 847 civilizations from being preventively eliminated. 847 species that still existed, that still created, that still contributed to the galaxy's cultural and scientific wealth, because humans had chosen justice over vengeance. Human cold fusion technology had been refined and improved by dozens of species. Now energy was so cheap and abundant that energy poverty was a concept of the past. Entire planets could be terraformed in decades instead of millennia. Humanity had expanded to 5,000 star systems, but not as conquerors, as partners, as friends, as the species that always asked first, how can we help? Instead of what can we take? And on Earth, in New Hope, the monument to the fallen still stood. 1,000 years later, still perfectly maintained, still visited by millions each year. Humans, aliens, hybrids, all came to see the 7 billion names, to remember the price that was paid, to reflect on the choices that defined a species. And at the monument's base, engraved in 10,000 different languages, were Isabella Reyes's final words. It wasn't a good deal, but it was the only one we had, and we turned it into something beautiful. The galaxy agreed. The last trade had been completed. 500 years of survival in shadows, 7 billion dead, countless sacrifices, all in exchange for a galaxy where no species would ever have to hide again, where innovation was celebrated, where justice mattered more than profits, where progress benefited everyone, not just the already powerful. And 1,000 years later, when galactic historians cataloged the most important events in interstellar civilization history, they always included the same thing in first place: the day an almost exterminated species chose to teach instead of punish. The day humans demonstrated that surviving isn't enough, that you must also choose how you survive. The day of the last trade. Because in the end, that was humanity's true legacy, not their technology, not their resilience, not their capacity to survive against impossible odds, but their choice. Their choice to be better, their choice to build instead of destroy, their choice to share instead of hoard, their choice to teach instead of punish. That choice changed the galaxy, and it would continue changing it for 10,000 years more, because truth, as Mariana Delgado had predicted 1,500 years ago, proved to be more powerful than any weapon. And humanity, as a species, never forgot the most important lesson. The true power isn't the capacity to destroy, but the will to build. That was the last trade, and the galaxy would never forget it. The end. If you had Isabella Reyes's power after 500 years of secret survival, would you have chosen revenge or justice? Leave your answer in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this cosmic journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our stories. See you in the next adventure beyond the stars.